The speaker this evening really needs no introduction to this audience. He is an institution in this part of Oklahoma. He's written the Centennial History of Muskogee. He has a book on places and people in Indian Territory that is just off the press, or will be by Sunday, and they'll be sold for the first time. He is one of my favorite people, and he is going to talk about one of my favorite Oklahoma personalities. I present Dub West to you to talk about Miss Alice Robertson.
I welcome you here. I'm not egotistical enough to think that you came to hear me, but to eat this fine food. And it is wonderful. It would be hard for me to give due justice to the person about which I'm speaking tonight, because so many things happened to her. But I'll do my best. If I were to give this talk a title, I would call it Alice Blue Gown. The song Alice Blue Gown was very popular during her heyday. It applied to, and it was played many times in connection with her. It was also used considerably in connection with another famous Alice at that time, Alice Roosevelt Longworth, who is still living, by the way. I think Alice Robertson is one of the greatest women that ever lived in America. And I hope to cause you to think the same before I get further. She had many things that we could give her credit for. She was the first woman postmaster of a first-class post office in the United States. She was the first elected congresswoman, the second one to serve, but the other one had been appointed. She was the first woman to preside in the Congress of the United States. She was the first woman to represent the President of the United States at an official gathering. She represented him at the Rose Festival in Portland, Oregon. She was the first stenographer in Indian Territory. She was one of the first businesswomen in Indian Territory. She started several academies and one college, Tulsa University, was really started by Miss Alice Robertson. So with that little background, I'd like to go into something about her and and some of her activities. I never knew Miss Alice. I wish I did. I feel like I almost know her from having studied about her quite a little bit. I can say that I did know her prototype. I had an English teacher in college by the name of M. Moss Richardson. That from all indications, she was almost a duplicate of Miss Alice. First place she taught school in Muskogee in the days when Miss Alice was in her heyday. And as she taught in college, and some of her old maid's ways, I am convinced that is where she received most of her training. Miss Alice was an enigma. She was elected to Congress by the soldier boys and the women, and she was defeated by them on her next election. She probably caused more marriages among young people of any person that's ever lived in Indian Territory. She was called the Cupid of Indian Territory, yet she never married. So that was one of her regrets of her life. Her mother was Anne Eliza Worcester Robertson, who was the daughter of Samuel A. Worcester of Park Hill fame. She was, incidentally, the first woman in the United States to receive a doctorate degree. Of all the women that have ever received one, she was the first one. And she was a pioneer puritanical New England stock. Her family the Worcester family rated right along with the families such as the Lodge family, the Adams family, and the Curtis family in the early days. And she was related on her mother's side to Esther Edwards, the sister of Jonathan Edwards, considered by many the most outstanding preacher that ever preached in America, was the first president of Princeton University, and was a very prominent person. She was also was from a line of 10 different Presbyterian preachers. So there was quite a background. Her cousin was the governor of the state of Virginia during Alice Robertson's time. So you had quite a background now. Reverend Worcester, most of us know quite a bit about him, was one of the most outstanding missionaries that had ever lived. He took his bride in 1835 south to the Cherokee land. He landed in New Yeshota just about the time that they passed a law that disenfranchising all Cherokees. He was arrested because he would not make certain pledges to the Georgia government and was kept in prison 4 years with hard manual labor, and was released only after he promised to leave Georgia. When he left Georgia, he came first to Dwight Mission and stayed there a few days, brought his printing press with him. Incidentally, he'd already started printing. His father was a close friend of Sequoyah and had helped Sequoyah some on the characters of the syllabus. And so he brought his printing press first to Dwight Mission, then he took it over to Union Mission and was at Union Mission several months. One of his children was born at Union Mission. And then after Union Mission, he decided that probably he could best serve the Cherokees here at Park Hill than he could at Union Mission. So he was a very famous person. And Alice had that kind of a heritage. Alice was born January the 2nd, 1854. She was born at Tallahassee Mission. And incidentally, next Saturday, a week from tomorrow, there will be a marker which will be dedicated which will indicate the location of old Tallahassee Mission. Her father and mother were superintendents of that mission. Her father and mother translated much of the Creek Bible for the Indians. And remember, her grandfather translated in Cherokee. So she had that kind of a situation. She was writing her memoirs when she died. And just a month or two after her death, the first chapter of her memoirs came out, the only chapter that ever was published. And this is what she says about herself. The start and incidentally, it gives some of the wit and humor that she had. The start brought me to Tallahassee Mission in the Old Creek Nation, January the 2nd, 1854. Consequently, I was present, but I have no personal recollection of the affair. It seemed that a fire had been raging across the holler from the school, and most of the persons associated with the mission had gone to fight fire when that tiny bit of humanity made her appearance. She said that she observed those people many times afterward coming home after a fire and saw how hot and smutty and dirty and so on they were, and she could imagine that they did not greet her with much enthusiasm. She gave us many memories of Tallahassee, and I would not have time to give you all of them, but I'd like to indicate one or two. She tells about this story. She indicates in her earliest one of her earliest memories was slipping out of bed and going down to one morning and going down to the cow lot, where and she was 3 years old at the time. She was watching the Indian girls milk the cows. As she shivered in her nightgown, she watched with wonder as the girls let the calves in to partake of their breakfast, then wrestled with them to put the rope around their necks and tie them to the fence and to continue milking. It was quite an experience for her, and she was fascinated by the activity. After a while, she decided to pet one of the calves. And since she was a blonde, in contrast to the dark-headed Indian girls, the mother cow, quote, turned on the strange white-headed object and promptly threw it over the fence, quote, in. She was caught by one of the girls that happened to be looking on and taken to the house. She relates that the cow was named Old Death. And when she sank in a quagmire 3 days later, Alice danced with glee on her hide as it was stretched out to dry on the roof of the barn. This was definitely in contrast with her later life when she had such an affable disposition and did so much for animals and persons. She tells of many of her vacations here at Park Hill with her at her grandfather's home. Her grandmother had died just before she was born. And incidentally, if you'll go to the Worcester cemetery, as I did last week, you'll find that Reverend Worcester is buried between his two wives out in Worcester Cemetery. She also remembers Tahlequah, and she came to Tahlequah on one occasion when she was 4 years old. And she marched in a Cherokee Temperance Association. They were marching on a cold winter morning, and she was a member of the group. She relates that we carried large purple plumes of flowers, which were called the Osage Almanac, because the Osages used to plant their corn and then go out to the State Plains on a buffalo hunt. When these tall purple flowers blossomed out, they knew that it was time to go home and eat their roasting ears. Incidentally, if you'll observe in August, between here and Muskogee, you'll find some of those same flowers that have been brought back by the Osages in years past. Miss Alice grew up at Tallahassee Mission. The mother and father didn't have too much time for their children because they were worrying about the Indians, but they tutored them at night and at various times. Many nights, both Mr. Reverend and Mrs. Robertson would sit up practically all night translating the scriptures and, of course, taking care of the affair in the daytime. And then, when they could, they tutored their children. And they were determined to see that their children went east for a good education because they were well educated. And so they were sent east. And first, we better remember that the Civil War broke in about this time. Because they were Northern sympathizers, they went north into Missouri and Kansas. And Alice says that as she came to Tahlequah, they went by Park Hill to leave some of their possessions with Mrs. Hitchcock, who was also a Worcester. And as they came on through Tahlequah, she was distressed to see the Confederate flag flying over Tahlequah. And as they stayed up in the north during the time of the Civil War. After the Civil War, they started back. Alice was 12 years old. She was a cook. She got up at 4:30 in the morning, did all the cooking and took care of things. When they got back to Tallahassee Mission, the mission was almost destroyed. They had used the mission itself for a stable for the horses. And Reverend Robertson went about the task of trying to restore the mission. Alice was a cook again, and they cooked in the smokehouse. That was the only kitchen that they had to use the only place they had to use their kitchen. Things went on much this way, and Alice associating with the Indian girls, boys, and getting whatever education she could. And incidentally, just before she left, she observed Muskogee before it came into existence. And almost simultaneous with Muskogee coming into existence, she went east to college, attending Elmira College, from which she later received a master's degree. At the age of 19, she went to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. She took the examination along with two other women, and was because the other two didn't go to work immediately, she was the first woman to go to work in that department. In 1880, Tallahassee Mission burned. First, just before that time, one of the most interesting things that I've ever run across was a little account that she tells about going to the Creek Council over at Okmulgee. She and her father drove the buggy over through Cane Creek and on over to Okmulgee and stayed all night. The next morning, she attended the Creek Council. A woman has never before attended the Creek Council. So far as I know, hasn't since. But she was asked to attend this Creek Council. And the entire meeting of the council was devoted to quite a memorial service to the whole Robertson family. They spoke in Creek and went on about all the things that the Robertson family had done, her mother and her father, also referring to her grandfather as related to the Cherokees. But as a climax to that, they asked this young girl to be acknowledged. She was 19 years old at that time. She was 20 at that time. And they indicated that just a few months before, they had been having some trouble getting their payments as they should. And they let her know about it. So she dug out the records and went after it and got the payments straightened out. And they all rose in honor to her, went around and each one shook hands with her, and then had their band, the council band to play for her. That was the most extraordinary honor that had ever been given a woman in that group. She went to work for Mr. Platt in the early days of Carlisle School in Pennsylvania. And while she was working in this school, Tallahassee Mission burned in 1880. She asked for a leave of absence from Carlisle School and went to Washington and implored the officials at Washington to try to see that she could get 25 children admitted to Carlisle School. The ones that had been put out of, some of them had been put out of school because of the burning of Tallahassee. The next thing she did was to go to Russell Sage. Now, she wasn't afraid of anybody. And Russell Sage was one of the richest persons in the world at the time. He controlled several railroads, so she asked him to give free transportation to those Indian boys and girls from Indian Territory to Carlisle School in Pennsylvania. And also, she asked him to make arrangements with some of the other railroads to get free transportation. That was accomplished. She came home and started teaching at Okmulgee. While she's teaching at Okmulgee, the Creek Council suggested that they ought to have a school at near Okmulgee. So they asked her to go back east and raise money to establish this school. She did. She had enough connections that she went to a number of people, especially in New York, and raised money to establish this school. They were going to call it the New Yorker School, the New Yorker Mission. But the Indians couldn't pronounce, the Creeks couldn't pronounce New Yorker, so they called it Newaka. And that's where New Yorker Mission came from. And not only did she raise the money for it, but she drew the plans and she supervised the building of this building. And when it was finished, her sister, Anna Worcester, who later married Judge Moore, was the superintendent of this school for a long period of time. She hadn't more than settled down from that when she was called to Muskogee by the Presbyterian Board and asked to establish a school there. They had a little school which was on the Presbyterian church ground. It was called Stoddard Hall at that time. So she went east again. She went east several times. And every time she went east, she brought some money back. She went east, and the main person that she saw that time was a Lauren Andrews Robertson, a cousin of hers. He gave the entire amount of money in order to build this school. And he asked that it be named after his sister, whose name was Minerva. Thus came into existence Minerva Home, which was a school that was in existence for several years, from 1885 until 1894, when it was changed to Henry Kendall College. And then in 1906 was moved to Tulsa and later became Tulsa University. So that was still another school. In 1886 or 7, she was asked to go east again and raise money for the Asbury Academy at Eufaula. And she raised considerable money for that, and also some of the other buildings for Kendall College. So, and during this time, she made a trip or two back with some of the Indian commissioners and was the interpreter on 3 different occasions and the stenographer, court reporter for the peace treaties and the peace negotiations that were made between the United States government and the Indians. Incidentally, while she was in the East receiving her education, she took some training in what would they call then domestic science, which later became home economics and has been changed to several other terms since then. But she was a pioneer in that work, and she brought that type of work to Indian Territory. She felt that one of the things that could be done was to teach the girls how to truly keep house and to take care of things. In 1881, her father died. She was very, very devoted to her father. Her father seemed to be more of a personable person than her mother. Her mother was a very stern, puritanical type person. For example, her mother scolded very severely Anna Worcester, her older sister, for traveling on Sunday because she ended out at the Creek Agency, and because she went, I think, about 5 miles from the Creek Agency to Tallahassee and traveled on Sunday, her mother gave her a very, very severe reprimand. And Alice, in her later days, made this statement, that she had always tried to not sin and tried to be the best person possible, but she's sure that she had a lot to be forgiven of. One thing that she wanted to be forgiven for was the fact that when she was going to Portland, Oregon, to the Rose Festival, that she was on a steamboat, and the steamboat wouldn't stop. She had to travel on Sunday. On his deathbed, he exacted a promise from Alice to continue the missionary work. She begged that she not be asked to give that promise, but her father insisted. And so she tried to carry out that promise the rest of her life, to try to be a carry-on work toward in the regard to the missionaries. She taught school in 1882 and 1883 at Okmulgee, and also went back there another time or two, as I said. While she was operating Minerva Home, she was the Pearl Nesta of Indian Territory. I'm sure most of you know what that means. She was the entertainer. Everyone that came to Indian Territory made her place the stopping place. She entertained Indian chiefs, waits, editors, educators. Didn't make any difference who it was. Incidentally, she was elected the vice president of the National Education Association, so it shows something about her capacity. One interesting thing was that on one occasion, 4 Western Plains chiefs came to Muskogee for the Indian Fair, International Indian Fair, and she invited them to dinner. Instead of 4 coming, they brought 40. They brought the whole retinue of their group, and so she had to adjust herself pretty fast, and was really the entertainer. And when she built Sawokla, that was really the entertaining place of and sometimes Sawokla is called Gathering Place, sometimes it's called Eternal Welcome. And either one would come in the category of that place. In 1890, she attended the Mohawk Conference. Teddy Roosevelt was there, and he said at that time that she was the most remarkable person in America, that he had never met a person with her actual bearing and with the intelligence and with the bearing that she had, and gave her quite a send-off so far as that. And that came up again a little later. In 1894, she bought the Stanifer photography shop, the only photography shop in Muskogee at that time, and established the Robertson studio. And from 1894 until past the turn of the century, all the pictures, Pastor, that were made in Muskogee, if you'll get any old pictures, you'll see Robertson studio on. In fact, just the other day, the Oklahoma Historical Society unearthed a lot of those old plates. And I hope to see some of them. I wish I'd have seen some of them 2 or 3 years ago. In 1898, the government asked Judge Thomas to raise 2 companies of soldiers for the Spanish-American War. He turned to Alice Robertson to help him, and together they did raise the 2 companies. And many of them had been her students, either at Tallahassee, been associated with her at Tallahassee Mission, or been her students at Minerva or at Henry Kendall College. And in fact, one of them that got killed, Milo Hendricks, was a very close friend of hers. They named the group there at the camp at the Muskogee for Milo Hendricks. So as the soldiers came through Muskogee on the Katy, she started doing something that became a tradition. She started meeting the trains day and night, hot or cold, rain or shine, sleet or rain, and met them, gave them coffee, donuts, cigarettes, candy, anything that they wanted practically, and started doing everything of that sort for us. When we had the big fire of 1899 in Muskogee, she again was one of the first persons on the ground with a big pot of coffee trying to help see that things came along all right. And incidentally, she was made an honorary member of the fire department, an honorary member of the Spanish-American War veterans. You don't find many things like that. Then, in 1900, she became supervisor of the Creek schools of the Creek Nation. And went all over the Creek Nation in a buggy by herself, supervising the schools. In cold, weren't any hotels or any place like that in those days. She generally stayed with the people themselves. And then the Cheesy McIntosh represented the Indians at that time. And they had quite a drought, and there were a lot of hard times right then. I want to read just a little bit from her report that she made to J.D. Benedict in connection with that some of that experience. In no place I shared a family dinner. In one place I shared a family dinner of bread and greens, to which I was welcomed with such unaffected cordiality that I could not but think of the proverb of King Solomon about the dinner of herbs where love is. Most serious financially was the loss or lack of food for horses, hogs, and poultry. Often near the roadside I saw lying gaunt carcasses of starved horses so thin that even the buzzards left them untouched. Horrier cattle managed to rustle for themselves. When Teddy Roosevelt was elected president, he remembered the young woman that he met at the Mohawk Conference. He remembered the woman that had befriended his Rough Riders when they were passing through Muskogee. So he appointed her as postmistress. She was the first postmistress of a first-class post office in the United States. And when he came to Muskogee in 1905, all of the political bigwigs snubbed her and didn't let her be on the platform. He called her out of the crowd and told her to come up and sit by him, and that as long as he was president of the United States, she would be postmistress of Muskogee, even though several were trying to get a job. So, and there was more government mail handled by the post office in Muskogee at that time than any post office in America other than Washington, D.C., because of the Dawes Commission and some of the other activities of the government. She built her home, Soroka, during this period in 1910 to be exact, and as I said, it became the gathering place and the eternal welcome of all Indian territory. She entertained practically everyone that you can imagine. And as I'd already made mention also, she was truly the Cupid of Indian territory. She literally thought it was her business to make matches, and she made lots of them. And she repeated many times that one of the regrets of her life was that she had not had the pleasure of being a wife and a mother. When Blackjack Pershing had his little episode down with Villa down in Mexico, quite a few soldiers went through here at that time. And she again was out there with her coffee and her donuts and trying to entertain the soldiers. When World War I opened, she appeared once more. And even though Muskogee was one of the first places to organize a Red Cross and to have a canteen corps, before that came into existence, she was down there by herself. A little later, the Red Cross was organized, and the Katie put aside a car on the siding for her. And incidentally, Dr. Pat Fife's mother was in charge of the canteen corps and helped Miss Robertson on that occasion. And she was by that time running a cafeteria. and every soldier that came into her cafeteria that she knew about, and all the relatives got free meals. Dr. Grant Foreman said she fed thousands of persons, and I'm sure he didn't exaggerate a great deal. In 1920, woman suffrage was voted in. And even though she opposed woman suffrage, not only then but later, she was implored upon by a few persons to run for Congress. W.W. Hastings was her opponent, and a very popular person from Tahlequah, a Cherokee, and was very popular. But she started in, and the only advertisement that she had was on some ads concerning her cafeteria, so local ads on the back page, on the want ad page of the newspapers. Both newspapers actually opposed her. The Republican Party, of which she was a member, opposed her, and of course the Democrat Party opposed her. But in spite of all that, she was elected. Dr. Pat Fife said that many voted for her just because they liked her, didn't think she'd be elected, but so many voted that way that she was elected. Mr. Paul Filton took the ads from her for that. And it was more fun than you can imagine to hear him tell about that. He said that, first place, not only then, but any time a person came in, she nearly always got her a cup of coffee and went and sat down and chatted with them and visited around all during the meals and everything. She fed them, and you'll find in the ad sphere of this local cafeteria that she fed them out of her garden. She had quite a farm, and she raised Guernsey cattle and and raised vegetables such as that. So she was a congresswoman, and more, according to the headline in the newspaper in Muskogee, writing miles of copy about Miss Robertson. Literally miles of copy were written about her. She received more paper notice, more newspaper notice than the President of the United States, and Harding did. She was good copy. A few years ago, the mayor at that time said that Merle Haggard had brought more renown on Muskogee than anybody that ever lived. Well, Merle Haggard did bring quite a bit of renown on Muskogee, but it wasn't anything like compared to that which Alice Robertson brought on Muskogee. She was not as popular a congresswoman as she might have been. She opposed the soldiers' bonus, and the soldiers didn't like that a bit. She opposed the Shepherd Counter Act, and the women didn't like that. She fell out with the League of Women Voters, who were getting very strong at the time. And so W.W. Hastings, again according to Dr. Fife, made a campaign saying, "Bring Alice back from Wonderland." And that was a pretty catchy phrase. And she was defeated. It was one of the tragedies of her life. She was crushed. She felt like people had turned against her. So on top of that, immediately after she returned, very shortly afterward, in 1925, her beloved Sawokla burned. She suspicioned it was arson. Of course, we don't know, but anyhow, it burned, and that took a lot of the pep out of her. She was, by that time, almost penniless. Incidentally, you might be interested in how much she spent for Congress, to run for Congress in these $1 million budgets. She spent, I believe, $2,100 and $2,125. She struck in $2,100, so it cost her $25 to run. And she made a full financial statement about everything. She made a full statement of all of that. So she returned to Muskogee and was not as happy as she might have been. She had really brought the Veterans Administration Hospital, which later became the Veterans Administration Hospital, to Muskogee. And she was made the first social worker probably in the United States, one of the first anyhow, because she was what we would call a social worker there. That wasn't too satisfactory because she was a rather dominant personality, and Hugh Scott was rather dominant, and they clashed on many occasions. Also, the soldiers still had it in their call that she voted against the soldiers' bonus. She voted against soldiers' bonus because she said she didn't want to pauperize them. And some of us would sort of lean some in that respect, but anyhow, that's what happened. And so she didn't keep that job very long. She was given a stipend from the Oklahoma Historical Society, and just to put it plainly, she practically dwindled into poverty. Fairly late in 1930 or early in 1931, she took cancer of the throat. Dr. Pat Fife was her doctor during that illness, and the previous illness too, as far as that's concerned. And she died July the 1st, 1931, of cancer. All of her medical expenses were not paid by her. Dr. Fife contributed to his services, and her hospital expenses were taken care of by friends. Lou Wentz sent, for a period of time, $100 a month to take care of some of her hospital expenses, and other people took care of it. She was, but one of the things that, just before she died, it was thought that she might be voted to the National Hall of Fame. Remember, Sequoia was voted to it, and she was put up as a candidate. The untimely end, it was rather apparent that she might get it.
being one of the persons representing Oklahoma in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, in the Hall of Fame in Slattery Hall. But the untimely death of Will Rogers at about that time caused it to be given him. Now, I'm not saying whether Will Rogers should have it or not, but I am saying that until that happened, she was a strong candidate. So she died on that date, and I still think she's one of the greatest women that's ever lived. Thank you.